Hi, I'm Erin and I work on Classroom here at Bible Project. And this is one of our class sessions exploring the book of Genesis. To set the stage, Tim and the students have arrived at a difficult passage, Genesis 3:16. Does God really want to punish women with pain in childbirth? That's what a lot of our modern English translations could lead us to believe at first glance. So let's take a closer look at what the original authors might have had in mind.
Verse 16, oh, Genesis 3:16. The joke of, get 5 rabbis in a room to interpret a passage of Scripture, and you'll get 10 interpretations. Genesis 3:16 is kind of like that. So I'm going to do my best to focus and steer our conversation, but really significant issues come out of this that I want us to talk about. Let me start with 2 observations that are relatively simple. They're not very well known, and they have huge significance for how we understand God's words here. So this is my translation. I will greatly multiply your grief and your conception. In grief you will birth children. That's the first half of verse 16. Let me just quickly survey other English translations. This is the New International Version. I will make your pains in childbearing very severe. So you walk away with a different sense from the NIV. With painful labor you will give birth to children. So on this reading, Yahweh is intensifying the pains of child labor. And that's pretty standard right across the board. ESV, I will multiply your pain in childbearing. In pain, you'll bring forth children. This is one of the, I never know what to do here. I think our English translations are remarkable achievements. Committees of scholars, brilliant. For the Hebrew Bible, the NIV committee, it was like 20 scholars. And they all are assigned different books, but then they get together and review each other's work and then vote. They vote on tricky passages and choices. On each of these committees, in the last few decades, really remarkable scholars. And so I never want to undermine confidence in our English translations, but there are some times where you can see how the vote swung. And Genesis 3:16 is one of these. And so please know I'm not trying to, this isn't a conspiracy theory. This is just saying translation is always an act of interpretation. And sometimes you just have to make a decision. So here's 2 realities about the Hebrew text of verse 16. First of all, the word pain is not the Hebrew word for labor pain. The word pain, itzabon, is the same word used of the man in verse 17. In itzabon you will eat from the ground. Are you with me? Mm-hmm. So whatever it is that characterizes the itzabon of the human is being put in parallel relationship. So, and notice how the itzabon of the human is, I'll just pull it up here. So I will multiply your itzabon and in etzev. It's the same Hebrew root word in both. And it's the same itzabon. It's the same exact Hebrew word used in verse 17. But isn't it interesting that it's translated pain in verse 16, but toil in verse 17? And notice how the itzabon of the man is further unpacked by the sweat of your hard, difficult work, resulting eventually in death, right? But toil has a very different feel to it, doesn't it? So there are actually 3 different Hebrew words for labor pain. There's a pretty developed vocabulary for labor pain. It's pre-medical technology society. For most humans, for most of human history, childbirth is fraught with peril. So we're obviously in that kind of cultural setting. And many cultures, ancient Hebrew, had a nuanced vocabulary for labor pains. itzabon is never used for labor pains or this root word at all. So that's the first thing. So we're going to do a concordance work on this noun, itzabon, to figure out. Here's the second thing, is that this word that gets translated as childbirth, or in the ESV, childbearing, NIV is childbearing, is not the word childbearing. It's the word to become pregnant. It's the word for getting pregnant.
Oh, snap. Is this about infertility? Oh, sorry, I'm jumping the gun.
No, I'm just, so, it's the, okay. Now, just to make this point, and I just want, like, no conspiracy theory, I'm just, I have the New American Standard here. I'm just going to do a search on the concordance. So here's, the form of this noun is actually unique. It only appears here, herayon, but it comes from the Hebrew root hara. So let's just do a search on hara, yes? The verb occurs 62 times in the Hebrew Bible. It's going to be used in the beginning of the next chapter, and she got pregnant. Cain had sex with his wife. She got pregnant. Hagar got pregnant. Sarah got pregnant. I mean, it's not even a difficult word to translate. She got pregnant, and it's always separated from the actual bearing. Sarah got pregnant and birthed a son. Are you with me? Yes. So that's the first. It seems to me that's a very significant observation that hit me like a ton of bricks when I realized it. Now, the word down here in the second half of what we're looking at is the word for birth, and it does have the word etzev. So this word etzev, whatever it means, we'll talk about this next, is applied both to pregnancy, both how you get pregnant and the childbearing, which means whatever this is about, it's not about labor pains. It's about the circumstances in which a baby is conceived and the circumstances in which a baby is born. Are you tracking with me? Yeah. And again, this is just, we're making basic observations about the meaning of words. So then this makes the million-dollar question, like, so what is this pain or toil? What is this all about? So I'll just show you examples. The word is going to be used again in Genesis 1 through 11. This is exactly what Yahweh experiences when he looks on the innocent blood shed in the land before the flood narrative. And he has serious regrets about these humans, and his heart is full of this kind of pain, atzav. We would call this emotional grief, yeah? Isaiah 54:6, where the family of Israel is depicted as a barren woman who has been abandoned by her husband. And the prophet is saying, Yahweh is going to call you back as if you were a wife deserted who was atzav in spirit. So once again, it's an emotional grief, broken heart. When David hears that his son Absalom has been killed, he has atzav for his son. Now what's interesting, so those are all verbs. Those are all this pain as a verb. Other nouns, there's other nouns, etziv, otziv. This is a famous proverb. A gentle answer turns away anger, but a word of otziv stirs up anger. So you can cause otziv with a word. Yeah? The Lord builds up Jerusalem. He gathers the exiles of Israel. He heals the brokenhearted. Notice the synonym here. That's so helpful. Brokenhearted, he binds up their otziv. This was a Hebrew Bible scholar, Ian Provan, who wrote an essay on this, published it in a major biblical studies journal over a decade ago. I can't believe that more people don't quote from his essay. It feels like groundbreaking, at least for English translations. So here's how he summarizes it. He says the word etzev is used of emotional pain and the pain involved in work. It can also be used of a more generalized kind of pain. It is never used elsewhere in the Old Testament, however, to refer to labor pains or birth pangs. Conversely, there's a well-established vocabulary that's routinely used to describe labor pain: sarar, chevel, and hul. If we take our lead from the meaning of etzev elsewhere in the Old Testament, Genesis 3:16 refers to the agony, hardship, worry, and anxiety of the circumstances in which children are conceived, born, and raised, and in which they die. This is the same word's clear meaning in the next verse when it describes the man's work in the field. Can I think of any stories in Genesis where children are, let's just start with conceived, since that's what the word is in Genesis 3:16, where they're conceived amidst a whole mix of anger and jealousy and broken relationships. Let's just name them. It will be a good
Rachel
exercise
and
for
Leah.
us. Rachel and Leah.
I like that you just said Leah.
I was going to say Leah.
Oh, instead of Leah? Instead of Leah? Yeah, Leia. I'm lost in Star Wars. Sorry. Right. Yes, Rachel and Leah.
Ishmael and Isaac.
Yes. Notice how both of those stories also begin with, as you noted, infertility. Mm-hmm. What does it mean, I will? Yahweh says, I will increase itzabon. When Rachel sees that she can't bear children, who does she think is withholding this blessing from her? Yahweh. She blames, and actually she goes to Jacob and she's like, give me children. And he says, what, am I God? So, and Sarai as well, yeah? Mm-hmm. And so it's this fascinating moment where if Abram's tests of faith have to do with whether he'll trust God's promise to give seed, each matriarch is undergoing a similar test. And I think that's what Genesis 3:16 is telling us. So we're a far cry here. So I'm treating this real analytical right now. The number, from my years in pastoral ministry, the number of women who I've had cups of coffee with to talk about this verse and how they feel about God assigning them to heightened physical pain in child labor. Because that is the meaning of our English translations that you walk away from. And what that does to someone psychologically, I will never have that experience. I can just only imagine. And it's just one of these weird things like, how did we get here? How did we get here? That's not what it says or what it means. But it doesn't remove all of the tension. What this is telling us is that in this story, there will be moments where God will use hardship as a way to, it's what the author of Hebrews says, isn't it? A father disciplines the ones whom he loves. But that's definitely the trajectory or the context in which this increasing of itzabon, because the man's environment for his productivity is also fraught with itzabon now too. And so Sarai or Rachel's struggle with infertility, whether they're going to trust God or not, is parallel to Abram's test when the land won't produce. When Abram goes to Canaan, what's the first thing that happens? There's a famine. And so how's he going to produce? Well, I'll go down to Egypt and leave my wife, hang her out to dry. It's totally parallel. It's totally parallel. So Abram's being tested in his domain of productivity, and the woman is, are you with me? Mm-hmm. So this was huge for me. I felt like, actually it was like a lightning bolt hit me. So we'll talk about the second half of verse 16 in a moment, because that's also fraught with the same kind of translation, interpretation. But thoughts or reflections, questions about this conception and birth, grief?
I'm just thinking about it as
the art form of poetry. This makes so much more sense then, because as far as paralleling stanzas about the now consequences for the woman versus now the consequences for human, now it makes more sense because they're both process oriented in this new reality of what it would mean now to be fruitful and multiply. That makes so much more sense now.
Totally.
Because her process is now Itzavon, his process is now Itzavon, and it makes so much more sense.
Yeah, that's right. And so really, this is filling out the reality in which they will be fruitful and multiply in an environment where they're not safe around each other. Think of how they hid their bodies. That was the first thing they did. They hide their bodies. And now the way that their bodies will work together in a family, in a community, to be fruitful and multiply from the womb or the land, it makes perfect sense. Yeah. So you're saying it actually fits into its context more when you see what the words actually mean. Yeah, I think you're exactly right.
Because otherwise it doesn't really make sense that it's like you will have a lot of dangerous, perilous birthing pains, and you'll just have some hard days at work. You know, like it's
You're saying
like
in
toil.
comparison, birth pains versus a hard day at work.
Yes, like toil, right? Like that word just really, I feel like, I think it does a disservice to men as well. The nature of it is it enlightens. It's not grief, right? It doesn't have the same weight. Yeah.
It changes how you perceive Yahweh's intent. And this is why I've come to call it God's lament. I'm being intentionally trying to stir up the pot there. You could call these punishments, but in a way, it's Yahweh naming the new normal in light of the decisions that they've made. And in this new normal, Yahweh will use it. I will increase. He will use this new environment to test the faith of his people so that they come to see he is the one who gives them life, not their schemes to produce children or to produce the fruit of the ground.